Dr. Oswald C.J. Hoffman was Walter Mayer's great successor as the voice of the Lutheran Hour. Walter's son, Paul, writes, he was a classical and linguistic scholar, professor, choir director, athletic coach, pastor, public relations director, theological observer, Bible translator, motion picture consultant, television and video personality, and member of numerous boards. As we said a moment ago, he's met with 4 presidents. But now he's finally made the big time. He's here with Tim and Al in the morning. Good morning, Dr. Hoffman.
Good morning to you.
Thank you for joining us.
Oh, I'm glad to be here.
You're going to be 83 December 6th.
Yes, you found that out.
I was praying with a fellow one time, and he worked with me at a Christian station in Southern California. He says, it seems like only yesterday that I was down on the farm. Has the life gone that fast?
Oh, yes. And it keeps going faster all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're sure delighted to have you here. Why do you think you were chosen as the Lutheran Hour speaker, a job that you held for 33 and a half years?
Well, it was the biggest surprise in the world to me. I was the director of public relations of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod at that time, and there, as I came into the office one morning, my head office was in New York, and I had offices in Washington, D.C., for relations with the United States government, and also here in St. Louis there's a news bureau. When I came into the office, there was this letter lying on my desk saying, will you be the permanent speaker on the Lutheran Hour? Now, as public relations director of the Synod, I should have been in touch with almost everything that was going on, but I had no idea that they were picking a speaker at that time. They did that in the utmost secrecy, and I did not find out until about 10 years later how that actually happened. But it's not a very telling story. It's just that they went around the room and took recommendations about who might be the speaker, and the former speaker, Lawrence Acker of Omaha, was there. And finally someone said, I'm surprised there isn't one name on here. And they said, who's that? And they said, Oswald, I didn't say C.J., Oswald Hoffman. And Lawrence Acker was the one who said, well, of course. And I understand that's how the selection was made. It was made right out of the blue, like that. And it seems to me that's the way God does things in this world of ours. He surprises us all the time.
He sure does.
The big surprises in my life have been the greatest evidences of the care and the providence of God.
I remember when I replaced a popular morning team in Southern California at a Christian radio station. And I was expecting Al to come back with me, but that wasn't to be for a while. And I remember going up front. I was at the station that night, and I noticed on the sheet that they recorded calls on, somebody had called up and said, who's this guy you have on in the morning? He sounds like he belongs in a funeral parlor.
Is that right?
And I remember walking back to my desk thinking, Lord, I didn't ask for this. And I opened my Bible, Living Bible, and I came across this passage. I mean, my eyes fell on this. Stop this foolishness and start trusting me. It was a passage out of Jeremiah. Unless you do, I'll not allow you to continue to be my spokesman. You are to influence them, not let them influence you. And I wrote that down on a piece of paper.
That's Jeremiah.
That's Jeremiah. I said, thank you, Lord, that's what I needed. What went through your mind the first week when you succeeded Walter Mayer?
Well, first of all, I had to get permission from the Board for Public Relations to do this work, and they gave me permission to do it for 1 year. But they said, we don't want to see you leave your post here. And after 1 year, they all got together and said, Pater Peccavi, which is a Latin statement meaning, Father, I have sinned. And they said, this makes a marvelous combination, public relations and speaker on the Lutheran Hour. And the Lutheran Hour gave me an assistant director of public relations who would help me with my work in that department. And that's how I worked for 8 years, doing both jobs in New York. I was also a pastor in a preaching capacity at St. Matthew Lutheran Church in New York. That's up at the top of the island of Manhattan. And it's the one Lutheran church that's above 300 years of age.
How much preparation goes into a Lutheran Hour broadcast, and did you write all the sermons yourself?
Oh, yes, I dictated them. But I had material gathered by a team of researchers who worked voluntarily and helped to make their own careers out of that. At the same time, they learned a lot, and I learned a lot from them. And whenever I approached, I did this because I was PR director at the same time. So I wanted to be able to come up to a deadline of a broadcast and not be left there without any material at all. And I usually had about 5 times as much stuff as I could use. And so I always dictated the sermons myself. Nobody else wrote my sermons at all. Sometimes those who had prepared the material said, my material was better than the stuff you put on the air. But that was usually the younger members of the group who made that comment. However that may be, I really owe a lot to those people. I learned a great deal from their ministries. They were men and women, and they were teachers and pastors, and they contributed of their knowledge and experience to my work as a pastor who was appearing on the Lutheran Hour throughout the world at that time.
Dr. Oswald Hoffman's autobiography is out. What more is there to say but amen? It's published, of course, by Concordia House. And in just a minute, Dr. Hoffman, I want you to tell us the story of what happened when you fired the guy who played Martin Luther in that movie. Martin Luther, one of the finest movies I've ever seen. We'll ask Dr. Hoffman about that in just a moment. 8:36 on Mornings with Tim and Al.
You heard me a while ago stumble over a word. Why, pray tell? Because I learned sight reading, not phonics. Academically, your children, your teenagers, learning phonics.
Dr. Hoffman was taught phonics.
You were taught phonics from your mother, right?
Well, yeah, I was taught to read both English and German before I went to school.
Wow.
And that was using phonics. Somebody asked me, how do you learn to read without phonics? Well,
I don't know.
You do. I mean, I don't have a lot of comprehension, and I was horrible when I first started in the broadcast business because I didn't know how to sound out words. But it is a fact that the brightest students who rank at the top of the class are those who read better and comprehend what they read. They're on top of the class, but they may not necessarily be the brightest. But if you can read, that gives you such an advantage, and they just don't teach phonics in school. And that's why the doctors at the phonics game have proven to countless teachers, parents, and students that the phonics game can not only bring a child's reading, spelling, and comprehension scores up to grade level, but often ahead of grade level. Move students ahead of their grade level in reading, spelling, even comprehension in as little as 18 hours. And it's fun. The results are truly amazing. It works in my home. Think of your child's confidence and knowing that he or she is one of the brightest students, the top of the class, and it is a doable goal with the amazing 18-hour phonics game. Toll free, 800-243-READ, 800-243-READ. Once again, the amazing 18-hour phonics game.
840 on AM 630 KJSL. We're talking with Dr. Oswald Hoffman. I need to correct that. You nearly had to fire the fella who played Martin Luther, right?
That's right. That's
okay.
Right.
What happened there?
Well, what happened was that Niall McGuinness, who played that part, and by the way, read for the part of Karlstadt in the film, we were still looking for Martin Luther, and I suggested to the director and the producer, the director was Irving Pitchell, and the producer was Lothar Wolff, who worked for Lothar, who worked for the organization that produced March of Time. Well, at any rate, they said, yeah, let's try him out for that. And here it was. We had started 1 week of shooting. Maybe $100,000 had been spent on the thing by that time. We were shooting on location at the moment. And then they had a ruckus the night before. Niall McGuinness was a medical student in London during the bombing by the German planes. This film was being shot in Germany with German technicians. And Niall McGuinness had a problem. If he took one drink of wine, he became a different person. He needed to stay away from it entirely. And of course, he went to blows with some of these German technicians, and they said, you get rid of that fellow or we'll put him in the hospital. And they were going to go over and get a new actor and reshoot the first scenes. His name was Norman Woolsey, if I remember correctly. And then Now McGinnis came to me. He said, if you stay with me, I'll stay with you. I said, okay, if you promise never to touch a drop during the rest of the shooting of the picture, I'll go back for you. And I did with Irving Pitchell, who was very reluctant to do that. Irving Pitchell directed some great films like Santa Fe and The Bells of St. Mary's and some of the other films of that day. Well, at any rate, they decided to go with me, and I spent my time taking care of Niall McGinnis to make sure that nothing like this ever happened again. It was hard to get coffee in Germany in those days. It was right after World War II, and I had some of the chaplains get some of this Nestle coffee for me in little jars, and I would toss a jar to him when he was playing calypso tunes on the piano in the evening. He never touched a drop of alcoholic liquor during that whole shooting, and he did the best job of his entire career. He has been in other films, but never in such an important position, and also never so well done as he did playing Martin Luther in the film of the same name.
And the film is still available, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah. From Concordia Publishing House, by the way, here in St. Louis.
Okay. Now, we mentioned... Let me ask you this. I wasn't going to ask you this, but the reason I ask it is because there are a lot of people maybe coming into the faith that wouldn't know how to answer this. Martin Luther, leader of the Reformation, had problems with Jews. When you visit the Holocaust Museum in Los Angeles, the first thing you see when you come down the stairs is a quote from Martin Luther. When you encounter people, let's say you're trying to win a Jew to Christ who doesn't know Jesus as his Messiah, and they bring up that, Martin Luther's hatred for the Jews, how do you respond to that?
Well, I have to tell you, first of all, that at St. Matthew Lutheran Church in New York, we had 65 Jewish members. These were people who had come to the faith simply by hearing the same gospel that other people hear, and who were also impressed by the fact that Christian people at their best are cheerful people. And they asked, why are you so cheerful? And we told them why. It's because Jesus Christ has been raised from the dead by the glory of his Father, and he lives and reigns through all eternity. And he, by the way, is according to the flesh, he's absolutely Jewish, and according to the Spirit, he is the Son of the living God. You put those two together and you have Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Well, you just tell them this story, and they look at it, and they say there must be something to it, because it works. And they were wonderful people, I want you to know, to teach the letter to the Hebrews to a Bible class which had a lot of these people in it was a new experience, you know. You didn't tell them, they told you, because they had this in their bones, so to speak.
Yeah.
They knew about atonement. You don't have to talk to them and convince them. Atonement is in Jesus Christ. He paid the price for the sins of the whole world. And he offers himself now for the life of the world, that people having faith in him might go the same way he has gone, and that is to a tomb from which the stone will be rolled away. This is the life.
Yeah.
And I guess you have to say that's why they did it. Now, Martin Luther, in his later years, I understand, wrote some things that we cannot defend. I don't know why he did it. It probably was disappointment that more Jewish people didn't become Christians. It may have been something like that. I know this, that in these early years, he was much more gentle toward Jewish people than the church generally was at that time. Now, what changed him, I don't know. Sometimes things happen that you don't keep track of, or he didn't keep track of either. He never told us what it was, but however it was, he wrote things, which I don't think that anybody can espouse today.
I want to talk to you in just a minute about the most significant things you learned from each of the four presidents you sat down and talked with. We're delighted to have in studio Dr. Oswald C.J. Hoffman, the author of What More Is There to Say But Amen, published by Concordia. Dr. Oswald C.J. Hoffman in studio. Sir, you have had the opportunity to share your faith with a number of world leaders. What has that been like? Has that been difficult for you to do? Tell them about Jesus?
Well, I didn't find it to be difficult at all. Generally, they're just as open as anybody else to the good news when it is told as the good news. It really is. And, of course, some of them been American leaders, some been others. I interviewed Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia.
Now, he knew the Lord, didn't he?
He did. He knew the Lord, and he was also responsible to a great extent for the building of that large Christian station in Ethiopia, RVOG, Radio Voice of the Gospel, to which Lutheran Hour contributed to and helped to make possible.
Now,
in fact, we furnished about 16 programs in different languages to RVOG that be broadcast all through Africa and all through Asia, too.
Now, if I were Haile Selassie, I would have had a difficult time calling myself the Lion of Judah.
You would?
Yeah. Wouldn't you? I mean,
Well, that's symbolic. Yeah, that's of course prophetic, too, at the same time.
It's like Tim Barron, you're a great guy. You're the Prince of Peace.
Oh, no, but he was descended. I mean, he was descended of Solomon, you know, but still.
Well, I don't know whether he was or not. He really usurped the throne from the empress, whom he served as a secretary.
Okay.
But he was a very nice, small of stature, and gentle person. And although he was head of the Coptic Church, he saw to it that the Lutheran Church was able to build this great station in Ethiopia. By the way, it's just a piece of junk today. It was confiscated by the communist authorities and used by them for several decades, at least 2 decades. And the result is they left it in such shabby condition that you couldn't possibly use it anymore. It's out of date and it's absolutely decrepit. That's what you have to call it. There were 29 antennas there, the same as Radio Islam in Cairo, and it broadcast over its larger territory as the station in Cairo does. It was really a tremendous station.
what did you learn from the presidents of the United States that you met? Anything?
Well, let's take Eisenhower, for example. By the way, I never asked to meet any of them. I was asked by them to come and see them. And in case of Eisenhower, he was in the midst of the Lebanon crisis. That sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Sure does.
Only it was over 25 years ago. And in the midst of that crisis, I had written some prayers for peace, and I recorded them too. And he asked me to come to the White House. I did. I was held up that day for 2 hours. I was the only one on the schedule, as far as I know. And Eisenhower was meeting with John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State. It was a Monday, to prepare and plan the speech which the president was going to deliver at the United Nations on Wednesday, with his 5 or 6 point program for Lebanon. As I say, I had to wait 2 hours, so they took me around the White House and showed me things I usually didn't show to people. I saw the president's practice golf course there on the grounds of the White House. They said the next president's going to be fisherman, and we're going to run a river right through here. But however that may be, I saw in the basement of the White House, I saw everything around the White House you possibly could see, and then I was called in. And he was sitting there in a gray suit, wearing a vest, and looking quite relaxed, and he said, I have got a few Lebanons on my mind this morning, and we began to talk about the crisis in which the country was at that time. He also told me about the fact that the Queen of England was going to come to visit him, and some of his advisors said, you'll have to go with her to the Episcopal Church because she is the world head of the Anglican Church. And he said, I told them that when the Queen comes to visit me, she'll go to my church. That happened to be National Presbyterian. And when I go to England, I'll go with her to her church. And I guess that's the way it worked out when she came. But then I gave him a platter, you know, a photograph platter of my prayers that I had prepared. And he said, I'm just getting ready to go up to lunch, have lunch with Maisie up there in the family quarters. And he said, I'll take this along and we'll play it on a machine. He said, the trouble with that machine in the White House is that it so often doesn't work. Well, I thought that was kind of, revealing that in the White House things don't work either. I'm not commenting about the present political situation.
Boy, we're running a little bit behind time, but I wanted to get in your most embarrassing moment. What's been the most embarrassing moment that's ever happened to you in the pulpit?
Well, it never happened in the pulpit as far as I can remember. But I can remember when I was a boy going to high school, Luther Institute in Chicago. I had to take the elevator down around the loop and then out the west side on the Lake Street L. And I had 2 bags in my hand. I was holding on to a strap to, everybody stands on the L. And suddenly I got an overpowering, inclination to sneeze. And I didn't have time to grab for a handkerchief. I couldn't drop my bag or anything. And I sneezed. And the woman who was sitting facing me there got out her handkerchief and she said, "Don't they teach you anything at home?"
Wow. Yeah. Oh, that's in the book, by the way.
That's embarrassing.
Yeah. Do you...
my mother would have died if she had heard that.
Yeah. Does it concern you that the church today of Jesus Christ is becoming a one-world church, that churches that don't even believe John 3:16 are uniting with churches that do? Does that concern you?
Well, they're only make-believe churches who do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the real church is the one that Jesus Christ calls himself, my church.
Yeah.
That is the assembly or the congregation of all believers throughout the world.
A mighty
and he is the head of that church, and he always will be the head of that church. The faith of those people will be focused entirely on Jesus Christ. And it is that because he was raised from the dead by the glory of his Father. You can't take that out of human history any more than you can take his death out of human history. Yeah. He died and he was raised from the dead by the glory of his Father. And as St. Paul said to King Agrippa, by the way, he met with important people too. He said, "Why should it be thought incredible with you that God should raise the dead? Indeed, why not?"
Mm-hmm. Now, we learned from Barbara Walters in one of her books that she asks the toughest question last.
What's that?
And so, if it's okay, because then if you get mad at us, we're... the Lutheran hour is only a half hour long.
Oh, yes, isn't that true?
And yet it's called the Lutheran hour.
Yeah, Walter Myers did that. And every program was called an hour in those days. It was a Westinghouse hour and the General Electric hour. Mm-hmm. And when he started, it was a Lutheran hour. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it might have been an hour long at the very beginning. The first broadcast was from Cleveland. They had a chorus especially selected for that occasion and everything else. But it's interesting, isn't it, that the Lutheran hour, the largest, the most extensive program being broadcast over the most stations in the most countries of the world, should be originating here in St. Louis, Missouri. It's always been the headquarters.
If a Sunday had fallen on an April 1st when you were doing the program, you could have maybe said something like, "Folks, the program is called the Lutheran Hour. If you're only getting a half hour of this program, call management on Monday and complain."
Yeah.
Hey, make them play the whole thing.
And then fellows like you would have been mad at us for the next 10 years. Actually, I always said it's called the Lutheran Hour simply in order that we don't send people an anonymous letter. They know who's broadcasting, and they can write to us, and we also will respond to them.
Last night, Louis Farrakhan was on Nightline, and Ted Koppel was quoting him saying that he had at one time said that Ezekiel's wheel is a massive UFO and it's going to rain destruction on white America and spare those who embrace the Nation of Islam. What would you say to Louis Farrakhan in light of those remarks?
Well, I don't know whether I'd be addressing just those remarks, but I certainly think that anybody who claims to be a leader today has to take into account the needs, the wants, and the desires of everybody. And I believe that even I am incapable of doing that. I'm not saying that I'm special in any way at all, but I don't know of anybody else who's capable of doing all of that in his own personal responsibility. I think there we have to look to God for his help in reaching out and touching the lives of people and letting them know what his prophecies really mean, and in the second place, how he is willing to help everyone who needs help in this world of ours. God, who sent his Son, Jesus Christ, to die for all of us, is also the one who reaches out to touch the hearts of people and to move them to love, by which faith works, and also to have in their hearts hope, which is the ground of all faith, as St. Paul said. You heard about that in the word of the truth of the gospel, and it's now present among you, bearing fruit and increasing, and so it is in the world today, as it was in the world of that time.